Hey, and welcome back. It's time for the next video. As some of you will have noticed, I actually reposted a video I had done in a previous channel about 6.5 years ago. I posted that a few days ago. It's called Friends Don't Let Friends Study Psychology. And I posted it because it's directly relevant to this video that I'm doing now. This video now is a continuation of the series of biblical wisdom for non-believers, but I'm going to put it under a new title that I think will be more helpful. And it's going to be, as you can see, Jordan Peterson for people who don't like Jordan Peterson. Subtitle: Cain, Abel, and the Student Crisis. So you'll want to check out my video on friends not letting friends study psychology, as it'll give a lot more depth to some of the stuff I'm going to talk about here. But anyhow, so as I've mentioned previously, one of the main purposes of this YouTube channel, which will soon also be a podcast, is to show non-believers, as I very recently was, the secular wisdom that is contained within the Bible and religious community. And by secular wisdom, what I mean here is that wisdom that does not require you to believe in Jesus, God, anything like that, in order to be like, yeah, that's a good idea, that's wise, we shouldn't forget that. No one, as I mentioned before, no one has helped me see this, the Bible and religious community as a source of wisdom more than Jordan Peterson. And in this episode, I'm going to be talking about one of the earliest gems I got from him in this category of wisdom. But before I get into that, I just, I want to talk. I know a lot of people do not like Jordan Peterson. He was a professor of mine. I was totally in agreement with him on Bill C-16. He was my hero for a few years. Now he has, in the last year or two, repeatedly disappointed me. And I hope he can turn things around genuinely. But let's just say that I think he's given people valid reason to not want to hear from him. But the thing is that he actually has offered a great deal of wisdom. And while I can understand why some people don't want to hear his voice, I still think they should hear some of these ideas. And so, hey, maybe if it's coming from a different voice that actually has maybe some degree of sympathy for your feelings about him, maybe this will be a pill a little bit easier to swallow, but we'll still get the medicine in. So I invite you to check out actually the first video I made since I started really coming out here and making YouTube videos regularly on Jordan Peterson, where I go into great detail about what it was like to have him as a professor, the reasons I admire him, the wisdom he's offered, but also the things that he has done that have disappointed me and I think have harmed his ability to really help the world as much as he can. But moving on into this video, so I'm going to start off by talking about my experience as a university student, like my whole academic story. So basically, I was told my whole life growing up by family, teachers, and just the culture at large, that getting into and completing a good university program is sort of like my ticket to a good future. And we've all heard that, I'm sure. And so all of my life, I was, quite good at school. I was very driven and disciplined. So like I pushed forward and I got into a great university, the University of Toronto, which at the, top school in the country, so hooray for me. And I worked really hard when I was there, like dean's list every year. I tended to be among the better students in the class, probably never quite the best, but among the better ones, at least in the classes that I was most dedicated to. I had a really high sense of sort of hope and achievement related self-esteem. Like, as far as I was concerned, because I'd been told this by the whole culture, I was doing the most ambitious, responsible thing a person that my age could do: go to university. And so while I was there, it's super easy to get caught up in things, and I figured, hey, if being a university student is the best thing I could possibly do as a 19, 20-year-old, wouldn't it be even better if I were to become a professor? And so that became my goal. And so I dedicated several years for this. Like I worked my ass off at the University of Toronto, and I was fortunate enough to get into a couple of good master's PhD programs. One at the University of Arizona, one at Rutgers University. I chose Rutgers. The program should have taken me probably about 6 years to complete. I left incomplete after about 7 months, and some of the reasons why is that I realized, like this work, I respect science so much, but doing it, I find very tedious. But that itself wasn't enough. Like I felt like if there was a good future job-wise, like where I could become a professor and get tenure, and then eventually start picking what I study and how I study it, and get to be a part of the academic community my whole life, I totally would have done it. But what kept me from doing it was when I realized how terrible the job market is. Like people don't talk about becoming a professor the way they talk about becoming a professional athlete, but maybe they should. The odds aren't nearly as bad as making it to Major League Baseball, but the odds are bad. Like if your university, the one in your city, puts up a tenure track position tomorrow for a psychology professor, which by the way they won't, but if they do, they're gonna get like 300 applications, and 299 of the applicants are gonna go home empty-handed and unhappy. So that's pretty bad. And just give me a second to find out where I am in my notes here. So I left the program, and soon enough, I came back home to Canada, and I was applying to jobs, and all that. And what I started realizing was I can't actually do anything that a person would be willing to pay me a reasonable sum for, like at all. I can't make anything. I can't fix anything. There's very little I can do that a lot of other people couldn't do, right? It's like, and it made me think, it's like, I felt like a Scientologist. I felt like a Scientologist who'd spent like 10 years in Scientology. Maybe they were all the way up to OT8, and then they realized this was all a terrible idea and not at all what I thought it was, and so they left. And then they realized, oh my gosh, I had a lot of standing in the Church of Scientology because I was OT7, but nobody else cares, right? It's like, as a psych student, I could be like, yeah, I worked with this professor who's very respected, and I went to these conferences, and I wrote a 60-page essay on this that got like a 90. And, the people in the professional world, like, they've never heard of these professors, at all. Right? It doesn't matter. So like it seems fancy when you're in it, but then when you get out of it, you realize how niche the market you were in is, and how little you learned that can help you outside of it. But nevertheless, I got a job that was, by all practical purposes, pretty good. It was a government health agency job in downtown Toronto. It was paying me about $20 an hour, which is not bad in 2007 for a person whose highest degree is an undergraduate degree. Not bad. But the thing is that I felt so crushed inside. I was despondent. The work I was doing was not interesting. It was just office work. I'd spent all these years studying these big, lofty ideas and having these big ambitions of a future in academia. To be doing an office job just crushed me. And yeah, it just left me in a very, very bad place. But meanwhile, I had all kinds of friends who had studied subjects different from mine, ones that were much more practical. One was, he was an economist, a few others, engineers. And then I had other friends in law school, med school, things like that. And so the thing is, like, these were people that I was just as smart as them, and I worked as hard or harder than all of them. But they were flying high. Like, I had some friends who were making six figures by their late 20s, and then other friends, like, at elite law schools and in med school. And I wasn't doing remotely as well. And this led me to feeling very bitter and resentful and upset at myself and upset at the world. But especially at myself. And so this is what's going to lead me to talking now about the story of Cain and Abel. So this was maybe the first time from Jordan Peterson I saw a piece of biblical wisdom with applications outside of the Bible to your life, my life, right now. So just to review how this story goes, the idea is after leaving the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve had two children, Cain and Abel. Abel was a nomadic herder and Cain was a farmer. So both offered sacrifices to the Lord, Abel providing from his flock and Cain from his crop. But God favored Abel, the herder's sacrifice, rejecting that of Cain, the farmer, which led Cain to become resentful and so enraged and resentful to the point where he killed Abel out of envy and bitterness. So what Peterson's interpretation of this was that both Cain and Abel made sacrifices. And if without making sacrifices, there is no chance of being better off later. But still, not all sacrifices are the right sacrifice. So he who, devotes themselves to the wrong sacrifice will not get what they want despite their great efforts, which can lead to intense resentment as like how many years and how many thousands of dollars and how much blood, sweat, and tears and effort did you put into this thing that's getting you almost nowhere? And so, of course, the moral of the story here is to do your best to make sure that you are making the right sacrifices. So let's bring this back to the world of academia. Like me, people have been told for generations that college is the way to go and the way to a better future, a better life. And this makes a lot of sense historically. You go back a handful of decades and most people could not go to university. Like there was a time not long ago where you had to be like upper middle class or higher or just an absolute genius to get into college. And so college was a rare club, and so it was special. Like if you went to college, you stood out. But the thing is that over time, education has become more and more broadly accessible. And so it's become progressively less special. Like you're no longer that unique if you have a university degree just due to a scarcity of scarcity. And in addition to people being told that going to university is your way to your great future, people are also often told in university, do what you love. If you do what you love, you will never work a day in your life, and you will do better at what you do because of all the intrinsic motivation you have. I think this is, on its own, terrible advice. Terrible. Lots of reasons. There are some people for whom it's good advice. Like, let's say that you genuinely love engineering. Well, great. Be an engineer. It's a practical field, and since you love it, you'll get more enjoyment out of it than most, and you'll probably even do better because of your intrinsic motivation. So great, go for it. But the thing is that more often than not, the things that you love are loved by a lot of other people. Like psychology is the most popular degree on campuses, right? There's other things too, like journalism, very popular programs. And so because you have so many people that are also intrinsically interested in the thing that you are, you've got a lot of people to compete against. And what if the thing that you're interested in doesn't have many applications in the first place, or isn't scalable? Like engineering is great because it's scalable. You can work on a single project that has implications for 10,000, or 100,000 or 1,000,000 devices, right? So like it's hugely scalable. But things like psychology, like it's usually not scalable. It's like very kind of one-on-one or one-on-4 kind of ratios. And again, there are so many people competing with you for the spots because lots of people are just as intrinsically motivated as you. There's more people interested in psychology than there are in engineering. And the thing is that it's super easy not to notice any of this. Like, because I was at the University of Toronto, right? Huge university, beautiful Ivy League buildings, all that stuff. I had professors from like Harvard and Jordan Peterson and like other tremendously great schools. I was seeing the big buildings, the beautiful buildings. I was seeing these really accomplished professors from great schools. I was talking every day about big, huge, lofty ideas. These are all things that can be very impressive. But the thing is, there's a lot of things you're not seeing. It's like, for example, you see the prof that made it. You do not see the profs that didn't make it. If your university, as I mentioned, like puts up a tenure track position, they're going to get hundreds of applications. Only one of them is going to get the job. And the one who gets the job is the one you see when you're a student. Although that's not fully true, actually, because a lot of the times when you're taking classes, you're being taught by postdoctoral fellows or adjunct instructors. When you come across a postdoc or an adjunct faculty, there is a very good chance that the person you've come into contact with is a person whose career is, for all intents and purposes, on life support. They're just trying to keep it alive, keep hope alive. But the illusion doesn't last forever for most of us. Eventually we leave the university and start realizing we don't have skills that we can put on the market and get a good job from. And most of us who want to become professors realize that that's probably not going to happen. It only happens for a sparing minority of people. And so basically, in the end, a whole lot of us are Cain. And when we realize this, it can make you feel very defeated, very resentful, very bitter. Because you've just made all these sacrifices. And as far as you're concerned, you've done exactly what you were supposed to do. You worked hard in high school to get into a good university. You got into a good university. You did well in the good university. You came out of the good university and realized you couldn't do anything. That's a Cain situation right there. And so the big recommendation is investigate potential sacrifices before you make them. For academia, this would be like doing things like checking impartial sources on labor market data, like things like in Canada, StatsCan, in the United States, Bureau of Labor Statistics. Find out what kind of jobs people in your academic discipline go on to. Find out for particular jobs what the employment rate is, what the income tends to be. Look at all those kinds of things. And don't just pick something just because it's practical. Like, I do think it's a bad idea to do what you love because you'll never work another day in your life. I think it's a better idea to find something that, is practical, that will allow you to have the kind of life outside of work that you want to have, that you think is okay, that you think, you wouldn't mind doing this, right? And if you can find something that actually is like practical and will give you the life out of work you want and is even better than okay, then just, count your blessings on that. That's absolutely fantastic and you're lucky to have it. But the idea is, it's like, if you do something you love and it's impractical, not only are you unlikely or not as likely as you'd like to be to get where you want to get to, but you might actually stop loving what you love. It's like the kid on the playground playing baseball with his friends at recess or during lunch hour. They are having way more fun than is the person in AAA in the minors who can just see that maybe they have a 2% chance of making it to the majors. And if they don't, it all falls apart because there is really no silver medal. Like minor league baseball players get paid like graduate students. They get paid peanuts. And once they're like into their like mid-late 30s, they can't even do that anymore. And now they've got nothing to say for themselves but that they're a former professional minor league baseball player. They have to go right back to the drawing board. When you have that kind of situation where like you feel like life success and life failure are hanging on every pitch you throw to some degree, I can't imagine you're having very much fun. And the same would apply for things like academia. Like when you're competing against 300 people for one job, are you still having as much fun with psychology as you were when you didn't have that pressure? And so to wrap up, in my last video, Friends Don't Let Friends Study Psychology, I said at the very beginning of it that part of the reason I was making the video was because back in the time when I was studying psych, I would have wished I had come across the information that I was presenting in that video even though there's a good chance that I would have written it off at the time, but it would have been good for me to have heard it. And so I asked the viewers, have you ever made the wrong sacrifice? Have you ever made a big sacrifice that took you years and intense efforts, where you had expectations of some great reward that justified it all, only to find out that it was a mirage? And so how did that affect you? And, after going through that, what wisdom would you offer to someone who is today where you were, at the beginning of all that? What would you say to them? So yeah, please let me know what you think about that. And as for upcoming episodes, I've got more and more stuff coming. One will be a video on discussing the cognitive science of the mind-body problem, how the mind and the physical world, the brain, interact. I will also be doing a video talking about the importance of having friends with different values and opinions than you. And coming up after that, in the near future, will be a podcast with a friend of mine from my church who is a pro-life activist, and I'm pro-choice myself, and we're going to have a good conversation just to try and kind of help bridge some divides. And yeah, we'll see how that goes, but I'm very optimistic. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you for the next one.